Hello and welcome to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT TV. My name's Andrew McKeever. I'm the news director here at GNAT TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. And season's greetings to all. It is Thursday, December 21st. Got the holiday season right around the corner coming up now, and hope you're all looking forward to a great time. We have a terrific panel here on our last edition of Press Pass for this year, and want to introduce and welcome for being here for the first time, Tiffany Pash, who is a reporter for VT Digger. She covers the education beat for Digger, and really pleased to have you with us today, Tiffany. Your timing is excellent because we have a lot of education news to get to, and we're going to get to that just real soon. But also want to welcome back Cherise Madigan, who is now the editor of the Manchester Journal. Last time she was here, she was just one of the reporters. So congratulations on that promotion, Cherise. And I understand you have some breaking news to share with us that's going to be in the Journal this week.
Absolutely. Well, the Southern Vermont Drug Task Force has been very busy this last week or so. Starting on Friday, there was about a dozen people, or it was announced that about a dozen people had been arrested as part of a 4-month-long investigation from that task force, and that was just in Bennington and Rutland counties alone. So you've got a dozen drug arrests on Friday announced, and then the day after in Bennington, a man named Dean Carbone from Springfield, Mass. was pulled over by Bennington police and arrested for possession of 240 bags of heroin. I think the street value was around $3,000. So already a big and busy week. And then yesterday morning, there was a joint arrest of 2 men at the Four Winds Motel in Manchester in a collaborative effort between the FBI and the Drug Task Force. And these 2 men were arrested on heroin charges, but it seems like the investigation into those 2 men started back in October when there was the double homicide in Townsend. And what happened then is a man named Justin Watt has been arraigned for that. He's of Springfield, Mass. As well. And it seems like what happened is that the 2 people in that cabin or shed were shot, and then the shed was set on fire. And so they found out afterwards that it was a homicide. And in the course of investigating him, they found connections to these 2 men, Jonathan Resto and Anthony Cassiano. So they're set to be arraigned this afternoon up in Burlington, which will be interesting as well.
Wow. Well, I know the Drug Task Force has been busy in the past with a couple of sweeps, although it's been a while since they had a sweep that netted that many people in our immediate area here.
And then just last night, the MPD also arrested 2, Brandy Marrow and Travis Norton, or Brandy Marrow Grover, excuse me, were both arrested on heroin charges as well. And that was announced last night. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
Well, the opioid crisis has been a big deal and a major story for a while now, and sounds like it's going to continue to be so.
Absolutely.
Well, Tiffany, again, great to have you here with us today, and so much going on in the education front to talk about. I guess the most immediate thing is we have a big deadline coming up in the near future. On December 26th is the deadline the Agency of Education has set for local school boards and school districts to submit their plans for how they're going to meet Act 46, the 5 criteria, I believe, that they're supposed to meet. I guess bring us up to date here. How are there many school districts that are not going to make that deadline, or are going to have some kind of problem with that, or where do we stand statewide?
I'm not sure. I think there's about there's somewhere between 75 and 80 towns that did not merge. And then the school boards are responsible for producing this self-evaluation and possibly proposal for either some local mergers or how they would like to proceed forward. That's a Section 9 proposal, or they've also been referred to as alternative structure proposals. Those are what's due on December 26th. And at this month's, last week's meeting of the State Board of Education, Donna Russo-Savage told the State Board that she expects about 30 Section 9 plans to come in around now by December 26th. She said she had a handful already and expected more. She expects there to be 3 mergers in January that'll come before the State Board. They're not mergers that would garner any kind of tax breaks. Those are over now. So these are smaller mergers, but mergers nonetheless. And then she also expects that there's going to be some smaller mergers in some of the Section 9 proposals. maybe one or two school boards in an area might merge, but not all of the school boards that had been talking in their Act 46 committee, that type of thing.
So it sounds like most school districts in around the state have either merged or come up with a plan or
So,
pretty much made
yeah.
it in under the deadline.
Yeah, they had, I have that written down here, 146 school districts have unified into 36 unified districts, and that covers, I think, around 66%, or will cover by the time they're operational, of the students in the state will be in a unified union school district, about 66%.
So then what happens next? You're looking forward into 2018, what's the process then that's going to roll out?
Okay, so from the new year to about, till June 1st, the Secretary of Education will be meeting with these school boards. They're going to have back and forth talking about what the school board would like, what's required in the law, and trying to work out a solution at the local level. And then on June 1st, the Secretary is going to present her statewide plan. And then the state board starts kicking that around, and they're going to have public testimony for months and months. And then sometime by November 30th, the state board's going to come up with their plan, incorporating the Secretary's plan, and they will have to vote on that by November 30th. That's the deadline. And that will be the new governance plan for the state of Vermont.
And then we're going to be done with Act 46?
Well, yeah, pretty much with most parts of it.
Oh my God, what are we going to write about?
I'm sure there'll be a new crisis.
Well, Charisse, locally, we've had a couple of Act 46 stories to deal with. Last month, Rupert and Paulette finally were able, after I think a long 2-year process, to come up with a plan that did pass muster with the Agency of Education. And Arlington and farther south in Bennington at the SVSU, we're still, well, I guess Arlington has come up with a plan that they're going to submit, kind of an unusual one. It seemed like to me anyway, it kind of grows more out of Act 77, which was another piece of legislation I think passed in 2013, talked about finding career pathways to education. But their main goal seems to be to really kind of hang on to their school district and supervisory union more or less as is. So that'll be interesting to see how they fare up in Montpelier on that. But down in Bennington, I guess is an attempt to kind of have a revote in Woodford to overturn that vote that failed earlier in November.
Yeah, and when it failed by a very small margin in both Woodford and Pownell. So they're hoping, I think, that something may turn around there. I think they needed 3 out of 4 of the towns to vote in favor, and of course Woodford and Pownell both did not. So it'll be interesting to see where that recount goes and if it affects the process or if things stay kind of as they've been. And then up in Paulette and Rupert, they've got to scramble to get a budget in place in time because they've got a very tight deadline and a lot of delays imposed because of the overall process of forming the new board and then having a budget ready to go live on July 1st. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Well, to be continued then for sure. Another bit of sort of local education news that came out a couple of weeks ago. Burton Academy announced its tuition increase of 2.2%, which is, I guess, lower than what they've been coming up with in the past few years. Local school boards are still finalizing their budgets, so we won't really know much about that until probably earlier in January. But meanwhile, the Manchester Select Board has started working on their budget. We were both at their meeting on this past Tuesday. What was your takeaway from the meeting? They spent about 4.5 to 5 hours, going through the weeds of the budget there. But it didn't strike me like there was some remarkable big new thing that was coming. It was kind of more steady as she goes kind of thing.
Absolutely, and I think the biggest news coming out of that, at least as of right now, is that the budget looks like it'll be fairly close to balanced. They expect about a 4% increase in property taxes, but they also anticipate a 3.36 increase in the grand list, which is basically the overall value of property in the region. So if that happens, then the tax increase that voters would really see in their municipal tax rate, and that doesn't include the school tax rate or the state tax rate, but that would be, I think, 0.7%, something very minimal. So I think the select board is really endeavoring to keep that as close to balanced as possible going going forward. It seemed like there was some really big savings when it comes to the school districts because the town will no longer be paying as big of a fee. I think they're saving $40,000 in renting the men's facility because they want to kind of distance themselves from that direct relationship considering the new big school board and how many towns are involved. Of course, that savings was pretty quickly taken away because there's a $25,000 increase in the amount being allocated towards the rescue squad. So
Right,
savings,
well,
but losses at the same
on
time.
the one hand this, on the other hand that.
Right.
But it was kind of interesting that there would be that bit of savings there with the arrival of the Taconic and Green Regional School District, which
Yes.
MEMS or the Manchester School District will now be a part of. It does kind of shift a few costs around. I think kind of interesting to see how all those things play out.
Absolutely.
Well, Tiffany, we mentioned Burton a moment ago and their rather modest 2.2% increase, which is slightly underneath what the governor's magic number is of 2.5%. But one of the ongoing stories of the past year or so has been this sort of standoff, I guess, between independent schools like Burton, and Long Trail is another one locally here, and there are many around the state, over this whole question of public tax dollars being used to finance tuitions at independent schools. And special education and financial transparency seem to have been two of the big flashpoints. But just last week, you had a story about the meeting on December 15th that occurred between representatives of the independent schools and the public schools. Where does that stand now? Because it seemed like that had gone on mute for a long time, and then a month or so ago it seemed like, oh, well, we haven't exactly found our way to yes on this one yet.
Right, they still have a far way to go. So this started with the state board revising rules that are used to approve independent schools to take on those publicly paid for students. And the problems that they were trying to solve, the state board, had to do with special education and funding, to make sure that schools would have enough funding and we wouldn't be in a situation that Burlington College put the state in last year when they closed all of a sudden, and the state had to pick up some of the work and tab to deal with that. Ultimately, they want a strong continuity of education for students. There's nothing on the verge of happening that anybody knows about, but they wanted to put something in the rules to safeguard on the financial front, and then also to ensure that special education students could go to the same schools that their peers and siblings go to. That's not so much an issue for schools like Burton, who teach all the different types of special education, but a lot of the smaller private schools or independent schools don't offer special education at all, or only offer a few types of special education or categories of special education services to students. So you can imagine a special ed child that has siblings going to Long Trail, per se, and it comes time for them to join their siblings at Long Trail, but they're special education, and it's not something that Long Trail's set up to teach. They can't provide those services. So that student might have to find another school to go to, usually a public school. And that isn't what the board decided at their very last meeting, was that that's not fair. That any student, whether they're special ed or not, that wants to go to really not whether they're special ed or not, any special ed student that wants to attend the school that their peers and siblings are attending, and if it's an appropriate, if the local education district finds it appropriate, then they should be able to go there. So they agreed to that, the independent schools did, and that was a big step for them, because up to then they had been talking about the burden of cost for their schools, and that they have missions, and that the student might not fit in with the mission of the school, and that they wanted to retain the right to reject that student if they didn't fit with the mission. So this was a big deal, that they said, yeah, you're right. Every student that wants to should be able to attend. So
So will this be something then the legislature will be taking up in
Yes,
January?
so
or
the
in
details, everything's in the details. Like, I mean, a lot of the independent schools might say, we were saying that all along, you know, we weren't saying anything different. Because the point is how. How are they going to do that? And even Phil Baruth, when he started that committee, he said, the question isn't if these students will be able to attend independent schools. The question is how. And that question really wasn't answered by the special committee yet. So Phil wants to take this into his committee, which is the Education Committee in the Senate, and have them flesh out the rest of the issues that the study committee wasn't able to resolve. So that'll be going on during this legislative session.
All right, well, I know, Sharice, you and I both remember that big meeting at Burton about a year ago where 800 or so folks jammed into the gym and were quite agitated about this whole question. So it'll be interesting to see if this sort of calms the waters.
Burton has even described themselves as being under attack when it comes to the state legislature because of these questions about independent schools or private schools. They even released an economic impact study about, I think maybe 2 months ago now, trying to show, you know, we contribute to the economy here as well. It's interesting.
Well, it was the person who was representing from Burton on the panel said the independent schools agreed that they did want this to be handled by the legislature more so than the state board, because at a previous meeting they kicked around the idea of, should this go to the legislature or should we return it to the state board, let them pick up where they left off and start, you know, working through the rules process. And they said, no, you know what, we want to keep it in the legislature. So I think maybe this study committee helped them feel a little better about that relationship.
Yeah, that's great. So.
Well, one other kind of big thing that happened this week, Tiffany, on the education front, you and I were both at the Education Summit up at Norwich University in Northfield earlier this week on Monday, where about 300 or so state officials, school board members, teachers, educators, union officials, the whole spectrum, I think, was represented, talking about you know, the problem the state seems to have with declining student enrollment, but persistently high costs that seem to be kind of going up a little bit at a time, all the time, and a staffing pattern that doesn't shrink in relation with the student population. I think I remember seeing that there were about 2,000 more staff members, and that's not just teachers, but custodians and school bus drivers.
But that's over 20 years.
Right. Well, we have like what, 25 to 30,000 fewer students over that period. So the governor seems to be interested in pushing this idea of cradle to career, and I guess I just wondered, do you think that this sort of sounds like something that might have some traction with the education community or the lawmakers?
Oh, yeah. The education policy community has been talking for a long time about the policies are correct to go from age 0 to getting people through high school and then through some kind of job training or higher education so that they're skilled and can take jobs right after they walk out that door with whatever their certification or diploma is. So that, you know, that's definitely something that has traction. What the governor was saying at the summit that he wants to do, though, and this is going to, you know, cause a lot of foreheads to wrinkle, is expand somehow or hopefully not take away from the K-12 education budget to grow into those two sectors and smooth out the funding from birth to that includes early education and care, not just once the kids start with preschool. It goes a little further than that so that working families can entrust their children to a child care center and afford it and know that it's a good quality child care center so they can go to work. So that'll help grow the Vermont economy. So he wants to take funding and add it to that end and to the higher education end. And our higher education, our schools have been, the higher ed schools have been suffering on that budget for a number of years. They haven't been getting what they need. So there's only a limited pot of money, a limited and even more limited number of people that are contributing to that pot with their entire wages and with their property taxes, because we have more and more retirees in the state and fewer of those people in the middle that are really bringing in the money and can handle and support the system, and then fewer students.
And that whole demographic question is certainly one we hear a lot about down here. Bennington County, I think, is one of the older counties in Vermont, and Vermont is the second oldest. I guess we're still behind Maine, although not by much, I don't think. You really wonder how that demographic question is ever going to find some way to improve. One idea I thought of what we should probably do is not just invite 100 Syrian refugees to come to Rutland. We should maybe be looking at getting 10,000 or something like that. And one way to kind of put more folks into schools and bring more people into communities that aren't retirees. But I guess a big question statewide. Getting back to, again, a couple of local questions before we have to run here. Looking ahead to town meeting, which all of a sudden is not that far away, two questions seem to be coming up that Manchester folks will get to deal with, and that's the issue of the rail trail and perhaps some sharing of the local option tax by the town with the business community. Sharisa, I know you've written stories on both of these. What's going on with those two situations?
Well, with the rail trail, it's a short portion of the former Manchester Granville Railroad Company that went from the Dorset Quarry, which is now a popular swimming hole, to the depot station here in Manchester near where RK Miles is. And essentially, they want to do what a lot of communities across the country have done and turn this old railroad that's kind of decaying into a biking, walking, multi-purpose trail. And a private group had purchased that trail, I think in 2009, and had started to develop it and has been doing work on it ever since. They were pretty much immediately slapped with a lawsuit from abutting landowners, and that animosity has not subsided. So there's a lot of people who are in favor of the town acquiring and developing the rail trail. Acquiring it could cost up to $100,000 if the prior owners are to be reimbursed, and then developing it could be 1.3 to 1.4 million over a few years. So we'll see how that goes. And for the option tax, the Manchester Business Association is hoping to acquire a portion of that to fund their marketing efforts. They work to market Manchester as a tourist destination. So both of those will probably be on the ballot. With the rail trail, it may be more should the town acquire it rather than should we start developing it.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that really does spur a lot of, I'm not sure if animosity is the right word, but like certainly emotion, shall we say.
Absolutely, yeah, and you're right, emotion is the better word.
Around that question. The local option tax bit with the business association is going to be really fascinating to see where the select board comes down on that one.
Absolutely.
Because what they want to do is share a portion of anticipated local option tax revenue above a certain amount to help fund their promotional activities for the town, and the argument being that, well, we're promoting the town, we're promoting business. The reason you're getting some of that local option tax money is because of our efforts at promoting and marketing the town.
Right.
So sharing a little bit to help us perform that mission is a win-win.
And typically that money's used for property tax relief, which is kind of a hot button issue nowadays too, so that could go both ways as well.
Right. Well, yeah. Taxes, always. We have about a minute left, Tiffany, and I know you just wrote a story the other day in Digger about the health insurance plan, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about that. That was a big deal towards the end of the session last year. It kind of was the reason that triggered the veto session in the legislature, but it looks like a fix may be in the works.
Well, a study committee was set up with Act 85 that was the solution to our veto situation. And that study committee was set up to look at the idea of providing a statewide health benefit for teachers. And the study committee came out with a report yesterday or 2 days ago, and it says that indeed we recommend a statewide teacher healthcare benefit. That means it would be negotiated, the teacher healthcare would be negotiated at the state level. They said that, and this was a majority report, not a consensus report, the vote was 6-3 3. There was a 9-member committee, so 3 people did vote against this recommendation. The recommendation was to have teacher health care negotiated at the state level because it would be fairer. Every teacher in the state would have the same access to the same health care and the same sharing of costs at the premium level and out of pocket. And then local districts would continue to negotiate salary and workplace conditions, vacation time, all of that type of thing. And they said it would be also, they could not say whether it would be less expensive because they haven't negotiated that contract yet. And the unions have said that they interpreted that it would actually not save any money. I did not see that in the report. What I saw was we can't tell you how much we would or wouldn't save. What we do know is that this past year, when the local school boards were responsible for doing that negotiation, there was the opportunity, according to legislation, that they could save $13 million, and they were not able to do that. They saved 1 point something, I think about $12 million was left on the table in potential savings. So the hope would be, according to this report, that more professional negotiators would go up against the other negotiators that are considered more professional and used to doing this type of work.
Instead of your basic school board director.
Instead of a school board member, right. And the teachers that are represented by the union. So their hope is that they would be able to get a deal for taxpayers that might be better, and also fairer for teachers across the state.
All right. Well, that was certainly a big issue last year towards the end of the legislature.
And the unions disagree with that. I want to just put that out there. They came away with a very different take on it.
Yeah, I mean, that's been their position for a long time. Well, I guess we're going to leave it there, but I want to thank both Tiffany Pash from Vermont Digger, she's the education reporter for that publication, and Sharice Madigan, now editor of the Manchester Journal. And I want to thank all of you for being with us today as well. It's been a pleasure being here with you. Hope you have a great holiday season to look forward to, and we'll be back again with you in 2018. Happy New Year.